Hi everyone, this is Alan Brown. The subject of today's video is the use of opacity over multiple layers in Photoshop. Now at this point, I assume you're familiar with Photoshop, layers, and the use of opacity. And if not, I suggest you pause this video and go visit those subjects first so you're ready to continue. Now the reason I wanted to produce this video was to provide a level of understanding. I create a lot of images using multiple layers, and to be honest, opacity wasn't working the way I thought it should. So I just wanted to explain my findings in order to help others. So let's jump into it. Before doing so, please consider hitting that like button if you find the content helpful. That will help me understand how to tailor future content. And of course, your comments are always welcomed. So let's jump into it. Here I have opened a simple image. For the purpose of the demonstration, I've replicated across a number of layers, and I've also moved each layer slightly to the right to create some separation. At the moment, all layers have opacity set to 100%, so as you might expect, only the top layer is visible. We can select and deselect. If we select the opacity of the top layer and switch that to 50%, and I'm just going to hit the 5 key on my numeric pad as a shortcut, the results may be as expected. We see the top layer and the next layer underneath it, layer 9, in equal proportions. Let's go back to 100% by hitting the 0 key. But what happens if we apply opacity across a number of layers? So if I select the top layer, hold down my shift key on the keyboard and select layer 1, that selects all layers. Then I'm going to hit the 1 key on my numeric pad to set the opacity to 10%, as you can see here. Again, as you may expect, with 10 layers, then the opacity across all the layers seems fairly uniform apart from the background. And I realize this is quite difficult to see on the screen, so I'm going to add this contrast layer. The picture then becomes pretty ugly, but for demonstration purposes I think it helps. So again, we have a background layer which we can determine by switching on and off, and the opacity across all the upper layers is fairly uniform. One thing I will note is, you may ask, well, why don't we set the opacity of the background down to? If I set that to 10%, then all we see is transparency. So we always want a background at 100%. So I'm going to hit the 0 key on a numeric pad to put that opacity back up to 100. Okay, so let's select the layers again, get back where we were, select layer 1, hold down the shift key, select layer 10 to select all the upper layers. What happens if we change our opacity to 20%? So I'm going to hit the number 2 key, and we can start to see now that the upper layers seem to be a little bit more dominant than the lower layers. And as we increase opacity to 30%, 40%, 50%, then we can see the upper layers have a much larger impact now than the lower layers, and the background has become somewhat lost. It's slightly there, you can just see it, but for all intents and purposes it has very little part to play in this final image. So why is this important? Well, if you create multi-layers and you using opacity to build an image, to blend the image together, then obviously the images at the top seem to have will have a greater impact than the images at the bottom. And again, if I switch off layer 1, actually what you're seeing is the background coming through more because of we're taking away the impact of layer 1. So the lower layers have very little impact. So what this means for you is, if you put your images, if you have say 10 images, and you put the images with the greatest detail at the lower part of the stack, layer 1, layer 2, etc., then as you increase opacity, they're going to have less of an impact on the final result. So my recommendation is, what I tend to do is really look at the images I'm putting into the stack, and to highlight those images, I really want to preserve detail or have interesting features I want to preserve. Put them towards the top of the stack, and quite often what I'll do is put my most interesting image, set that as the background, as the initial image, and actually replicate that image and move the copy to the top, so that when we get to those upper layers, I can bring in detail if it has been lost from the background. Now, the assumption of this video to this point has been that we're applying opacity equally across all layers, and of course it doesn't have to be that way. You can certainly try and balance the image by decreasing the opacity of the upper layers and increasing the opacity applied to the lower layers. The whole intent of this video was to make people aware that just because you apply opacity in equal strengths across all layers does not mean the impact is going to be equal. That's all for now. For more information, check out my website at alanbrownphotography.com. Bye for now, and may the light be with you.